Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Guy. Good to be here.
This is actually take two, and not that the listeners care, but it's interesting the live aspects that can come in. So, question for you, which I ask everyone on the show, is if you were on an aeroplane and you sat next to a stranger and they asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
I'd say I run a non-profit change agency.
Non-profit change agency.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, it's an organisation that supports people to understand and navigate change, and our particular focus is on the consciousness aspect of the global paradigm shift which is underway. So I'm talking about the end of the scientific industrial era and how everything seems to be changing at the moment, how our old systems like politics, economics don't seem to be working very well, and where we actually even seem to be going backwards. And so I work with a model which explains those change dynamics to help people understand what's going on and where we might be headed in the future.
Wow. So then if people are looking to build a new system economically, they would want to speak to you basically.
Well, I can identify very specific trends that are already clear in how society is changing. And one of the most simple is that we're moving from a very individual way of living, which was the scientific industrial era, to a communal way of living in the future. Yeah.
Interesting. You know, I only heard the other day and that there was a study done on happiness. And I don't know if it was Harvard or somebody spent a lot of money on what's the number one key to happiness. And you know what the result was? Human connection.
Yeah, I was going to say that. And that's a particular aspect of this paradigm shift. The new consciousness that is emerging, the main motivator and driver is deep human connection.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Which I think you don't get that through social media. You know, they might be connected to us hearing our voices right now a little bit. You know,
yeah, exactly. It's it's almost a disconnection in social media. I mean, you feel like you're talking and connecting with people, but you don't get that personal connection at all. You know, so yeah.
It's not like they can come and hug us off camera and just say that was a great conversation or something like that. Yeah, fascinating. Well, look, the reason why we're here today as well is because I bumped into Ronit Robaz, where we went for coffee, and a good friend of hers, Janine, stumbled into the cafe, who was the producer of the documentary From Shock to Awe. Yeah, that's right. Which I'm sure we'll touch on as well today. Yeah. And I instantly connected to Janine, and she was like, you know, talking about the podcast, and I'd love to support it. I watched the doco, which was incredible, what they were doing, the PTSD veterans with plant-based medicine. And then she basically connected me to you, tell me a little bit about your journey, and it was like, hell, you've been on one hell of a journey too, mate. So it's awesome to have you here. So why don't you take us back a little bit to where we get to that point, because I know you've been on quite a journey yourself, and it all started with you joining the army, was it? Yeah,
so I spent 15 years in the army. I did two different things in the army. I was a helicopter pilot, and I also served as an infantry officer, which was just leading combat troops. And most of my time was spent here in Australia, but I went to war in Somalia in 1993. So I had 5 months in a war zone there, which was a life-changing experience in many ways.
I can imagine.
And then while I was at war in Somalia, I really had an inspiration, I guess, to leave the army. That it felt like I'd done what I needed to do. I'd learnt what I needed to learn from that experience, and now I needed to move on to something else.
Yeah, and what year would that have been when you left?
93.
So you left in 93?
No, I had that experience of being at war and having that inspiration in 93. I left in around about the end of 94.
Yeah. Now, I was fascinated because we were talking off air just now as well about your own experience with PTSD. And one thing I want to mention as well is the fact that, like, I think we all experience different levels of trauma. I mean, you were only saying about, was it Stan Grof?
Yeah.
What did he say about trauma?
Well, his basic understanding is that we're all traumatized at birth, and just the fact of coming out of a nice, comfortable, enclosed womb into the outside world and the sudden change that happens, is traumatizing to some extent.
Yeah, and then the body is holding that trauma within us.
Yeah.
So, and I want to give that context because I appreciate not everyone would have been to the army or been in the forces and experienced, some of the things you would have. But I think we all have stress and traumas in our lives anyway.
I believe so. I think everybody's traumatized to some extent.
Yeah. Did you know this was going on for you when you left the army in '93? Or?
I had some idea, like I guess I realised I wasn't 100% well when I came back, but I wasn't unwell enough for it really to affect my life in any significant way.
Yeah. When did it start to show its head, if you like?
Probably, with hindsight, probably while I was still in Africa. I noticed just mood changes and those sorts of things. And then when I came back, I had this motivation to get out of the army, which I did fairly quickly. And then I ended up flying a rescue helicopter for 5 years and had a lot more traumatic experiences during that job. And so it was kind of a sum, of all of those things. And plus I'd had some trauma when I was a child, which they say often makes you more susceptible to trauma later in life. So I had what they call complex PTSD. It wasn't just one traumatic event, it was a whole series of traumatic events over quite a period of time. And then, as is often the case, it didn't strike me down straight away. It was 10 years after my war service that I had a breakdown from PTSD. And a couple of years after finishing the flying job. And that's pretty common for people to have it kind of sneak up on them later.
Afterwards. Wow. Is it like a pressure cooker almost, just slowly building within you?
I think you could see it that way. And also for me, there were certain trigger events, like I had a lot of change in my life just before I had the breakdown. My marriage broke up, I moved interstate, I changed my job, lost my network of friends. I had to create a new network of friends. All of those sorts of things just added up to trigger what was already there.
Yeah, right. So it's almost like the straw that broke the camel's back, and then everything comes out.
That's right. And then I was unable to work for 7 months. I'm going through treatment.
Wow. And what's the normal treatment?
I went through the mainstream system initially, so I was hospitalised. I was put on antidepressants, basically given a chance to rest in hospital. I went into one-on-one counselling twice a week to start with, and I was put on a group therapy program which ran for 3 months, and that was about 8 hours a week over 3 months with a few other people.
Wow. And how did you feel after that?
I wasn't fixed by any means. I was well enough to go back to work part-time, but still suffering pretty badly from depression and PTSD.
And then was it after that, because we all have a catalyst, right, where we decide to look for something different or look for change. Is that when you had started looking at plant-based medicine at that point? Or because you mentioned a bit of an awakening in your own journey as well.
Yeah, sure. So I had, it was prior to that breakdown back in '99, I had a small spiritual awakening which coincided with me starting meditation and a meditative form of Kung Fu, and also meeting some new friends who gave me some books that I wouldn't normally pick up, like channeled material and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And all of that triggered some sort of instantaneous awakening. I was sitting on the couch one day reading the first channeled book that I'd ever read, and just it was like somebody flicked a switch, and I had this sudden expanded awareness and realised that this channeled material wasn't just fiction; it was actually trustworthy material, And that really just made me thirsty for more information. So then from there I went on and read every book that I could find on different forms of spirituality.
Wow. Yeah, going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And then it was a couple of years after that all of those changes happened, which triggered my PTSD. And then I went on a pretty steep sort of healing journey. Did get back to work part-time. And when I moved interstate, I met a friend who had some experience as a teenager in Scotland with psychedelics, and both he and I were working in the change management, personal development area, and he thought that those experiences were useful from a personal growth point of view, so that sparked my interest, and I was totally drug naive at that time, so I had no prior experience of drug-induced altered states.
Yeah.
I'd had some altered state experience from meditating, which was useful when I did start trying plant medicines. But it was a few years after that conversation that my friend rang me up and said, I've been invited to an ayahuasca ceremony, would you like to come along? And I didn't know what ayahuasca was. And my main interest at that point was from a personal development angle. I was interested, and particularly around spiritual awakening, I was wondering whether this could be a useful tool.
Because you'd already had an experience to reference upon.
Yeah.
So
I did, and so I went along with my friend, and with that question in my mind, is this a useful personal development tool? And very clearly, my first experience showed that it was, and it was a really useful byproduct that all of a sudden I found that my depression kind of went away quite quickly.
And you weren't expecting that when you went?
Completely unexpected. Oh. And it was only then that I realised that these things were actually medicines that could heal you. I had no idea.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you still remember your first experience with
the
plant medicine?
Yeah, quite vividly actually.
Yeah, because I always struggle, 'cause I've only ever done it once.
Right.
And it was such a, for me personally, it's quite funny because I'd researched for a year. I think I was delaying myself because I was so nervous.
Yeah.
I was terrified basically of doing it.
Yeah.
But there was a greater pull.
That's why I had no idea what I was getting in for, so I wasn't, didn't know enough to be scared.
Yeah, I did the opposite. I watched too many YouTube videos, and but to this day, I remember documenting it all. I wrote 5 blog posts and just put them out there to the world once I'd done it too. And even when I go back and reread them to this day, it still doesn't really describe what happened, even though I tried to do my best, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Was that like that for you? Like, how would you describe it to someone?
Look, I went in with the question in my mind, is this a useful tool for personal development? And I had, at that point, probably about 7 years of meditation under my belt, and I'd done a lot of open-eyed meditation through my Kung Fu style. And I had some pretty weird experiences just meditating, including open-eyed meditation where the ground started to ripple as if it was the ocean and those sorts of things.
Oh, wow.
So, I wasn't a stranger to altered states. And when the medicine started to kick in, the first sign that I had was I started to see some coloured patterns with my eyes closed. And I said to myself, here we go, let's try this out. So straight away I tried to change what I could see to see if I could work with what was going on. And immediately this small voice in my head said, not power over, at one with, right? And I knew what that meant from my spiritual study and particularly my Kung Fu experience.
Right.
So I just relaxed into the experience, and what I tried to do when I tried to change it was it kind of looked like a plasticky pattern that I was seeing. So I thought to myself, let's see if we can change this to make it look like wood. And then I had that voice come in and say, at one with. So I did my best to be at one with what was going on instead of trying to actively change it. And then suddenly I found myself inside a tree trunk. And I traveled up inside the tree trunk right up to the pine needles at the top of this pine tree it was. And it was like I became in the tree and I could feel the sunlight on the pine needles and it felt amazingly good. And I thought, no wonder plants reach up for the sun. This feels fantastic, So it was like more than I expected. All I wanted to do was change it to look like wood and I became a tree.
For somebody that's not even experienced plant-based medicine or anything like that before, how real is that when you're having that experience to you?
It can feel extremely real. That particular experience of being the tree was momentary and it didn't shake my sense of reality.
Yeah.
But I've had subsequent experiences that have been more real than this, to the point where I feel like I've popped out of this reality into something that's more real than this, and then I've come back to this.
Yeah, that's incredible.
As if it's a simulation.
Yeah. Now you seem a pretty grounded, steady guy,
I like to think I am. Yeah.
So if you have an experience like that, what does that do to you overall, do you think, in terms of just living life here now?
It clearly stretches your understanding, of what's real and what's possible. There's no doubt about that. And when that happens, that's the seed of a transformational change. So if we then have sufficient integration and support to wrap our head around whatever that was, then it can result in permanent growth and expansion from a consciousness point of view.
Yeah.
And that's why these things are such good tools for personal growth, is because they can trigger those transformational experiences that have the potential to result in permanent growth with proper integration.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. I almost feel like, because I do a lot of meditating myself, and it's almost like it feels like the circuitry within me is upgrading constantly if I'm willing to feed it, nurture it, water it.
Yeah.
And it's allowing me to lean into that and start to have a different level of awareness that I used to have. And that continues to grow and expand if we continue to lean into it.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting about what you said as well. It made me think about surrender. You know, when you say be at one with it and not fight it.
Yeah.
Do you live your life like that now?
I do.
Do you do it well?
As best I can. Yeah, I've studied this Taoist meditative style of Kung Fu. It's a martial and a healing art for over 20 years now. And that's very much about learning to move the body in a certain way and learning to interact with another person's energy in a way that naturally flows with whatever seems to want to happen. And so that's been a wonderful learning experience and guide for me to learn through that Kung Fu system in conjunction with the psychedelic medicines.
Yeah, wow.
How to flow with the natural unfolding of life without surrendering your free will.
Yeah, of course.
So you still play a co-creational part in it. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's a beautiful, I think it's a beautiful place to be. Like, I find pockets of it.
Yeah.
Obviously it's not all the time, but I'm no doubt that's definitely something that people are doing it a lot.
Yeah, and my martial arts are Taoist art, which is based on the yin and yang theory of, balanced dynamics. So when I got that instruction of, be at one with it, I understood that it meant flow with what's unfolding naturally. Don't try and mess with it,
Yeah, beautiful. So you have this experience. It's taken you by surprise that it's helped your depression.
Yeah.
So then what happens? You then go...
Then I wanted to do it again. That's a pretty natural thing. And I found over time that it cleared my depression very quickly.
Completely?
Yeah, completely.
Wow.
The PTSD, not so much for me personally. I mean, it definitely chipped away at it slowly, but I didn't get a fast resolution at all. And it was only years later when I had an opportunity to try MDMA in a healing context.
And what is MDMA?
Yeah, MDMA is a drug that's currently being trialled in clinical trials to treat a range of things, including PTSD in particular, in conjunction with psychotherapy.
Okay.
And it's often called an entactogen or an empathogen, and its particular flavour is that it's particularly heart expanding, and it shuts down the fear centres in the brain. So if you've had traumatic experiences in an MDMA assisted psychotherapy session, you might be able to think about those traumatic experiences without re-experiencing the anxiety. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem mostly for people with PTSD, is when memories of an old experience come up, it's like you're back there and experiencing the trauma now, whereas MDMA creates like a safe zone, and you don't have that anxious experience when you're recalling things. And to some extent it seems to create a plasticity in the central nervous system and allow it to rewire itself. It certainly felt like that for me.
Wow. And did that help your PTSD?
Massively, yeah. So all of the treatment that I'd had conventionally, the time in hospital, the drugs, the individual counselling, the group therapy sessions, all of that added up did less for me than one session of MDMA did.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel though if you've put yourself through all the conventional therapies out there, and I'm sure everyone involved is doing their best. It's not a criticism, but you come out of it and you're still suffering.
Yeah.
And then you go and do this once, and it has that effect. How do you feel after that? Are you annoyed?
I felt very bloody happy, to be honest with you. Yeah. Just to be freed of that background anxiety, which I didn't even realise I was carrying. It wasn't until the next morning after that session I woke up and I felt more peaceful than I could ever remember. And then I realised how much anxiety I'd been carrying day to day, and it had just become part of my normal background noise, And that was wonderful. And the first instinct then was, I want to help other people to have this experience as well. So around that time, I also got involved in creating a psychedelic research organisation here in Australia called PRISM, psychedelic research in science and medicine, and we've been working for years to try and get legal clinical trials with psychedelic medicines happening here in Australia, and we recently succeeded in getting approval to run a trial together with St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne.
That's huge.
Which is to treat near-death anxiety and
near-death anxiety.
Yeah, internally ill patients, and that's just about to start now. We also have an Mdma trial in the pipeline. The first one I mentioned is with psilocybin from magic mushrooms. And the Mdma trial hopefully will begin in Perth soon, but we're still yet to get approval for that one.
Got it. Yeah. And that will that be working with the same kind of people, or will that be?
No, it'll be working with people with treatment-resistant PTSD.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, incredible.
And just a small number of people. But so, in that respect, my experience with plant medicines and with Mdma in particular is very similar to the characters in the documentary from Shock to Awe who use those same medicines to resolve their war-related PTSD and depression. Yeah.
Amazing. And I watched that documentary literally about 2 weeks ago for helping to prepare for this interview today, and it was incredible. Like I was with those guys the whole way through, and the way it just covered the aspects. But what really hit home for me is how debilitating it can be having PTSD.
Yes.
And like it really hit home for me. Like it was like, whoa, that's pretty heavy. And then to see the effect in a very open, honest way, it being covered, and what impact it can have on somebody's life is quite incredible.
Absolutely, yeah. When I had my breakdown, I was a real mess. I couldn't care for myself. That's why I needed to go into hospital. And I can remember on the second day in hospital trying to eat some soup, and my hand was shaking so much I could hardly keep any soup on the spoon. So it can really knock you around.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you certainly see the things that really matter in life, right? On a daily basis.
Absolutely. And they did do a wonderful job in that documentary of really taking you there, so you got a real insight into how this disrupts your life, and then the huge turnaround from the medicines.
Yeah. So how did you get involved? Because you were on tour with the movie here in Australia.
So a really close friend of mine, Mitch Schultz, is a film director from Austin, Texas, and he was one of the producers on From Shock to Awe. He got involved when the project was already part way through.
Right.
And Mitch and I have worked together and continue to work together on a number of different projects. And so I found out about it from him, and I said to him, we should take this on tour in Australia.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah. So then how was it received?
Really well. We were pleasantly surprised at the curiosity and support from the audiences, and we had a question and answer session with a panel, including me, at the end of each showing around Australia, and got a lot of therapists in the audience, actually, a sprinkling of people who were suffering from PTSD. But one of the things about PTSD is when you've got it, you don't want to go look at anything that's going to bring it up for you, so a lot of PTSD sufferers wouldn't want to go and watch a movie about PTSD because it would trigger their own PTSD.
Yeah, wow.
So much more in the way of therapists and medical professionals in the audience,
Yeah, fantastic. And Mitch was directed The Spirit Molecule, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah. And it's because, like I was saying, it was because of that film I went and actually started looking at plant-based medicine and the methyltryptamine, because it really challenged my own beliefs at the time when I watched it. It was like, wow, really? Come on,
Yeah.
So definitely recommend that documentary as well.
It's great.
Yeah. Amazing. So leading all the way up, so you've just done the film tour, and what is your vision for the next 5 years? It seems you've got many things on the go. That's
I
all
do
happening.
have. I'm particularly interested in how human consciousness is changing and how that plays out in the real world. So my work is mostly oriented around helping people to have a deeper understanding of human nature and who we are and what we're changing from to, and how that's likely to impact everyday life in the real world. And I've had the benefit of studying this amazing body of research from an American psychologist called Dr. Claire W. Graves, who, through extensive field research and analysis, really mapped out how we change when we grow through life, from being a young infant through to an adult, and the various ways that our worldviews shift as we go through transformational change, and how all of that is tied to our life conditions and influenced by our life conditions.
Yeah.
And his work is a really, really good map. And the people that he studied, some of them were ahead of the mainstream. You know, it's like human evolution is a bunch of people bopping along in a conga line, you know, through the evolutionary process. And some folks are up the front of the line, most are in the middle, some are down the back. And he captured the full spectrum. So he found some people in his data set who were well ahead of the mainstream, and they were really pathfinders for the future of society. And by studying their motivations, their values, their worldview, we can understand what society is going to be shaped by in the future. Yeah.
What was the name of this person?
Claire W. Graves.
Claire W. Graves.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's an amazing body of work. He died before he published it, so it's not well known. But I've just had the pleasure of writing a foreword to a new book on his work called The Change Code, which is going to be released in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be into that,
yeah,
for sure. So, all right, you've been on a hell of a journey. Anyone listening to this today that would be curious about looking at, I mean, should we wait till we have PTSD before we go and do this, or do you think we should explore it anyway? Like, what's your take and view on all this?
I think most people who explore psychoactive medicines probably don't have PTSD, you know, not in a serious way. Many people do it out of curiosity or for various different conditions that they might want to get insights into or heal.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky time at the moment because there aren't many places in the world where you can go and legally have an experience with these things. And even if you go to somewhere like Peru, it's full spectrum in terms of the quality of service that you will get there from facilitators.
Yeah, wow.
You know, there are, like any industry, there are opportunists who just want to take your money and send you home, and there are other people who are deeply dedicated and experienced and know what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my first piece of advice would be do your homework. Speak to somebody, you know, ideally who's been to somewhere and who will recommend it. And make sure that you are doing it for the right reasons. You know, don't get pressured into doing it by a friend. Make sure that it's deeply what you really want to do and it's on your personal path, and that you're not going to have any regrets afterwards because somebody pressured you into doing something you didn't really need to do or want to do. That's pretty significant. And thankfully, with the benefit of the internet these days, there's a ton of information out there. You know, from people who've had these experiences and who are prepared to recommend places to go.
So, what I'm interested, would you go back to? Do you continue to take plant-based medicine? Like, do you like? I remember Graham Hancock listening to an interview of him saying he would go once a year, and he would always learn something and come back. Or like, is that the same for you with this, or do you?
I have continued, through the years. I've travelled overseas a lot. The problem is that in many countries this work is illegal, and so you need to be mindful of that. And if you do end up doing it in a country where it's not legal, understand the risks that you're taking around that. I think there's a strong push to end prohibition globally at the moment, and I think that's going to accelerate in the next few years. So I think we're going to see it becoming more open and legal in different countries. And cannabis seems to be leading the way there.
I was going to say, it's the same with CBD oil and that, isn't it? You're starting to see that change now.
So there's a sort of a wave of change sweeping the world. You know, more and more people are doing this and understanding that it's actually not what our governments have told us. You know, as part of my involvement with psychedelic research, I've looked into the laws around prohibition of these drugs and can say without a doubt that the laws are not based on scientific evidence. They're based on social bias and politics. And more people are realising that and pressuring governments to go to an evidence-based, science-based legal arrangement.
Well, I know Tim Ferriss has been backing a lot, isn't he, in the US? When it comes to psychedelics and research.
Absolutely, he's been very supportive, and you know, more and more people like him donating to the research organisations and calling for legal reform.
It's like a grassroots up, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
And it's because it is illegal in most of the world. It's hard to really gauge how many people out there have, for example, drunk ayahuasca. I think it's a lot of people globally. Because,
it has to be, surely.
I hear a lot of stories, and I don't think there are many countries that are untouched by the plant medicines. So I think there's more people than we really know who have had these experiences.
Yeah. Always made me think of the movie Fight Club. It was like
that's right,
this
exactly.
underground thing. Once you're in, you know about it. Kind
that's
of thing.
right. Just don't talk about it. Yeah, very true. And of course, documentaries like From Shock to Awe, which are very, very powerful, spreading the message. And one thing that really impressed me about that documentary is it's a great bridge between mainstream society and the psychedelic world.
Yes.
Which is seen by many people as fringe and weird. But here you've got down-to-earth folks, army veterans, who've had transformational experiences, somewhat unexpectedly, and speak very warmly about the experience and how it changed their life. And I think it's good for mainstream people to see that, and that it's not something super weird.
Totally, and I'll just touch on this last thing, because I'm the least unsuspecting guy, honestly, when you meet me and talk to me, and like, that is passionate about any of this work. Like, it's not like I've got dreadlocks or I haven't washed in 3 weeks or wear a crystal. Like, it's like, but that's the perceived persona in society quite often. And like, it's an escapism. Where it's not. For me, it's like we're living in escapism, and this is a self-discovery. It can be. That's
right. If you look back at the history of how our prohibition came into being, it was very politically driven. And particularly in the 60s, was tied in with people having these experiences, realizing that we shouldn't be shooting each other in wars, and then going protesting against the government, be getting involved in wars, and then the government decided to crack down on the drugs to shut up the protesters.
The government, they've got a lot to answer for, right? I always ask a set of questions on the show, and you probably touched on it, but I'd still be interested to hear your answer. And I always ask is what's been a low point in your life that you later look at as a blessing?
I guess, as I mentioned, the breakdown that I had from PTSD, and I thank my understanding of Claire Graves' work for the fact that when I went through that experience, even though it was one of the most difficult experiences in my life, I also knew, because I'd read a book on his work just before I had the breakdown, and it was like a map of transformational change. And so in the midst of it, even though it was very, very difficult, I knew what was going on. I knew this was a transformation and not like a dead end. And so it gave me hope that I would come out the other side of it, perhaps better than I was when I started, And it took quite some years for that to really unfold for me, but I can honestly say that that was a transformational experience that changed my life, ultimately in a very positive way.
Yeah. And then you can look back on that and be grateful for what it's taught you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, it's great to hear. Because I see it all the time, even with our retreats. There's people suffering, and it's like, I want to be able to really help, but obviously the greatest teacher is for them to reveal the diamond within yourself, right?
Of course, yeah.
But when you see that change, and even when I look back upon my own different things in life, I'm so grateful now, because they've shaped me to where I'm at today. Yeah. But when we're in it, it can be really hard.
Absolutely, it can be. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. What does your morning routine look like?
My morning routine, I normally like to wake up with the sunrise. So I've kind of trained myself, as soon as this first light breaks, I'll wake up. I usually pick up my phone and have a look and see what's happening in the world for the day, because I work as a futurist. I speak as a futurist, and I work with change, so I like to keep tabs on what's happening in the outside world. I don't have a TV, so my main way of accessing the news is through my phone, and I just do that in small doses. So I'll do that, and then get up. Some days I might go for a walk before breakfast, and I work from home. So do
you still have a meditation practice?
I do, yeah. So it's my kung fu. I do a very traditional Taoist form of kung fu called Tai Chi, which is a moving meditation essentially, and I do that probably about 4 times a week. And it's so good for me that if I don't do it for 2 or 3 days, I really start to notice the difference, and that's what has always driven me back to do it again. It's that feeling of feeling bright on top of things, physically fit, that's kept me doing it for 21 years now.
That's always a good indicator, isn't it? If you could take a week off, which is healthy, you can go, oh, I really notice this. And
exactly.
When there's a good practice. No, that's awesome. And if you could have dinner with anyone tonight, right? from any time frame, anywhere in the world, who do you think it would be and why?
I think it'd be Nikola Tesla.
Oh.
Yeah, because I'd love to talk to him about his insights into frequency and energy. Yeah, and I firmly believe that frequency and physics is really the future of medicine.
Yeah. Wow. There you go. That'll be a good conversation.
It would be. It'd be a great conversation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And everything we covered today, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to ponder on before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I'd like to just say that the world is looking pretty challenging at the moment, and is quite challenging for a lot of people. And the way that I see it is that we're in the middle of what I call a slingshot dynamic. And if you imagine a slingshot, to fire the slingshot, you've got to pull the elastic band backwards and create tension. And so what's happening in the world at the moment is that everything's been pulled backwards to create the tension for a big leap forward in human consciousness. And this is demonstrated in the data in Claire Graves' research, and everything that I've read about his work and everything that I see in the outside world tells me that this is what's going on. So I think a lot of people are losing hope because they see the backwards movement, they see the regressive values, people going back to old sort of rigid right-wing values and these sorts of things, and think that we're done for. But it's actually just a transition period, and we're going to come out the other side of this far more capable than we were before.
That's a great analogy. Just hang on right when that slingshot gets let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome, mate. And where can I send everyone if they want to check out more of what you do? You have a podcast as well, don't you?
I do have a podcast called Future Sense, and the website for that is futuresense.it. Futuresense it. I have a blog called emanate.net, and that's EMAN, the figure 8.net. And there are some other links out that they'll find on the blog site.
Yeah, and we'll link in the show notes anyway. So if anyone's listening to this on audio, they can just press pause and scroll down, and it'll all be there for you.
Yeah, cool.
As well. Steve, mate, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks
the podcast
very much. Appreciate
today.
it.
Really appreciate it, my man.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.